Hello and good day everyone. Welcome to another Excel VBA tutorial, and this one is just a continuation of our web automation using VBA. And today what I'm going to share with you is the wait element to exist, which is an important item in the web automation because based on my experience, one critical part of web automation is monitoring the site delay or wait time response, like navigating to a site, waiting for the new page to load completely, waiting for a pop-up form to show, because most of the time, the next step in your code depends on the new website page or view, and you need to make sure that the element you will trigger or control already exists, or you will probably receive an error. So for today, we will be creating a function that will help us to ensure we will not encounter program error because of the site loading problem or delay. I will make it as a function instead, so we can utilize it on the later sessions. I will create a module. So let's go back to the previous Excel that I used on the previous two tutorials. So here, I will create a module that will house all the functions that we will be using on the following tutorial as well. And if you are not familiar yet in VBA function, I will explain it as much as I can, but there are a lot of tutorials there if you want to learn it in a greater detail. And I assume now that you already watched the two previous videos for the IE Navigate and Activate IE tab, because we always need to start from these two procedure, and I will be just using again the same workbook for this whole tutorial. So first, before we start, what is a VBA function? So if you want Excel VBA to perform a task that returns a result, you can use a function. You can place a function into a module like this in the Visual Basic Editor, and I think it's better if I create a sample function. So this is just a basic function sample. So this is a function that will get the area. Oops. Ooh. Okay. And inside this function, we need to have two parameters. First one is variable x, which will be a double data type, and then y as double. And oops, why I always press that. And this function should return a double data type as well. So the area is equals to x times y. So for example, I have here a sub procedure which I will name get area, and then if for example I have a lot of 100 items that I need to get the area, I just can simply call this function, so I don't need to declare a variable and make this formula every time I need to process those each items. So you can call that by, for example, message box area of 2, 3, and 3 is equal to, just call the function. So there, once we run this, oops, argument is not up, and I'm sorry, since our function requires two parameters, the x and y variable, so we need to send two value as well to these functions in order for this to work. So we will be use 3 and 3. And now again, let's stop this and let's try to run it again. So according to this, area of 3 and 3 is equals to 9, which I think is absolutely correct. So let's try other value, and there, the area of 6 and 3 is equals to 18. So that's a basic example of function. I'm not sure if you really get the idea of using that, but later in this In this topic, we will cover function in a greater detail. So maybe you are confused why there is a function and why there is a sub. The difference between a function and a sub in Excel VBA is that a function can return a value while a sub cannot. Functions and subs becomes very useful as program size increases. So if you have a very complex code and it is composed of maybe 300 to 600 lines of codes, and inside your codes there are a lot of items that was repeatedly written, and they just do the same thing, so it's better to use functions instead. Okay, so now let's apply this new topic to our code. So make sure that you have an open Excel which is saved as macro enabled, or the extension should be .xlsm. And again, if you're not yet in this part of VBA, you can go there by simply pressing Alt F11 in your keyboard, or if ever your developer tab is available, you can just look for this icon, the Visual Basic, click that, and you will be redirected to this VBA environment. Okay, so we will start this by inserting a new module, and again, just right click anywhere in this part and then go to insert and select module. So make sure to name that module first. So my module, I will name it a web functions. So along the tutorial, all the functions for web automation will be placed in this module. And as a reminder again, for those who just started watching this video, I recommend to watch the first two videos that I created. But if you're not interested, as a reminder again, when working with web automation using VBA, there are two references needs to be added before you start, and you can do that by going to the tools and click these references, and then look for the Microsoft HTML object library and Microsoft Internet Controls, and make sure to select those two and click OK. Okay, next is, oops, I think that I need to explain the scenario first. Okay, so for this one, we will be using the Facebook site. So in Internet Explorer, not in Google Chrome. So just a quick demo. So what we're going to do is to start with navigating to this site. Then the next goal is to input a value to the email address box. But before we do that, we need to make sure first that the email address box or this element exists before we input a value to it. Just a form of security, maybe, if you are confused what really the purpose of it. I can't look for the best site example, but I really want to have this or have this web automation part tackled first before we proceed on the other part, because I know we will be needing this function. So since we already have an IE navigate code, I think I just need to modify um, this and add to our web function module. So later I will be adding a new modules again, but I think the first thing that we need to do here is to convert this procedure into functions. So just to practice how to use function. So let's start with the IE navigate, because that is the first item that we need. So in doing functions, you need to start with the function keyword and then the name of your function. So I will name this IE navigate, and this function should have one parameter, which is the W-length variable, which should be a string. And we are just practicing how to use functions, but for now this function will not return any value. So just like a sub, the user just need to call this function, and then it will perform its task. So like this sub procedure in the IE navigate, we need to have a public IE object, which I think is we already have here, but okay, I think we don't have. So it's better and it's advisable that you have a public IE variable, which will represent the Internet Explorer object. So in our function, we will need to start with setting that IE to create object, Internet Explorer, that application. And then do not forget to set the visibility setting to true, and then we can add the IE.navigate to whatever link is sent to this function. And then of course let's automatically add the normal IE web page load. So we need to have a do until loop here, or let's start with do while IE.this is equals to true, and let's have a do events. So this code is when you are navigating to a web page and you see this loading sign of the web page. That is what being controlled by this do while loop. And to ensure that the page complete to partially or is sure to ensure that the site completely load, we will be adding another do until loop, i.e. that ready state is equals to 4 loop, and of course we also need to add the events there. So how to use this function now? So here again, this module will only house all the functions that we need in this tutorial, in this web automation tutorial, but we need to have another module which I will just name main. And basically this is where we will usually uh, work and organize all of our functions or code. So for example, I'll just name this, I'll create a new sub procedure which I will name automate FB or Facebook for now. And now how can we use the function that we just created? So that is IE navigate. Let me just rename this. And now in the main, again, the first goal is to navigate to the Facebook page. So we will call that function. We don't need in calling a function, you don't need to insert the call keyword. So there, oops, oh, why? Okay, I navigate. This may be because we have another IE here. So I think it would be better if I comment this for now, so this call will not be confused. So once you type the function name, you will see that it requires a parameter, unless you will have an error to that. So you need to provide a link where you want to navigate. So at this time, you'll be navigating to the facebook.com. So after navigating to that page, let's just have a message box that okay, it's completed. So let's try to run this procedure, and let's see if this will work. Okay, so it's just waiting for the page to completely load. Bear with my internet connection. So let's just wait for the message box because okay, so since that is finished loading, it's means that it's already completed. So I hope that you already see the importance of function. Just imagine if you need to navigate to different site within your code, and without using a function, you'll have to write those about 10 line of codes every time you need to navigate to a new web page or site. Okay, so again, the goal is to insert a value to the email address text box after we navigate to the page. So, but again, our main goal in this tutorial is to secure that the element exists before we control or trigger it. So let's create a function that will ensure that this element exists before we do anything to it. And going back to the web functions module, I will create a new function which I will name, or let's move it there. So I will name it weight element, and these functions need to have 4 parameters. The first one is the element type, which I will call what element or WL, which should be a string. And then the next one is the element attribute. Okay, but first, let me just discuss what what element it means, or what element type means. This parameter will contain or hold the element tag name, like the input button, the anchor tag, table, TD, and so on. So if you're not familiar with those, if you do inspect element in Google Chrome, for example, we inspect element this. These are the element, the input, the TD, the TR, table, and there. So the DIB, image, or IMG, script, those are called tag name, and those are the value that we need to send in this parameter. The next one is the attribute. So I will just call it WAT, should be a string as well. And this parameter will contain or hold the element attribute that you want to use as reference. Examples of these are ID, name, value, area, label, href, and so on. And to show you an example, so for example, the element that we want to use is the input element, and then the attribute of these elements are the type, the name, value, autocomplete. Those are all considered as attribute. So here in the source codes, all that are in color orange, I think, those are the web page element attributes. Okay, and then the third parameter should be the element attribute value. So it should be a string as well. So once you declare the element, for example, you have the input as an element, and then you want to have the name as the attribute, then you also need to provide the value of that attribute, which is the LSD. So once the program runs, it will look for the input element and look if it has a name attribute. And if it has the name attribute, it will check if the value of that attribute is LSD. Okay. And then of course the what time, which should be as long. And this will be in seconds. Of course, everything should have a limit, especially when there is a site problem. And of course, we want our code or program to be terminated instead of giving it an infinite time waiting for something to exist. So we can set it, for example, 30 seconds or 120 seconds, which depends on the user or the site behavior. And let me just expand this. And this function should return a Boolean value. That's why I declare this function as Boolean. So because we need this function to return a Boolean value which either be true or false. True if the element was found and false if not. If the result is true, we can safely continue with the next step, but if it is false, we would need to terminate the program and maybe show a message box informing the user that the object was not found within the page, and of course no next action can be triggered. Okay, so we need to start this function with declaring a variable is found, which will be a Boolean data type, and let's give it an initial value of false, and then we need to declare a variable x as well, which should be a long data type, and the initial value should be 0. This will represent the time, and another variable that will represent the object element, so I'll just call that L subject. We will not give it an initial value, and then let's uh, let's add a do until loop, which will continuously loop until the element is found. Excuse me, or the x variable is greater than the value of the w time parameter. Okay, I'm sorry, didn't make it clearly. So okay, so I'm sorry again. This do until loop will continuously loop until the element is not found and the x variable is not greater than the value of w time parameter. Okay, so here in this wait, let me just finish this, or x is greater than the value of time. So make sure to always increment the x for each loop, and of course we need to add a 1-second interval to give a website a chance to make some refresh, and maybe by that time given another element might be generated. So let's just give it a 1 second. Okay, now we can start with our for each loop. And when dealing with object, for each loop is the type of loop that we can use, since the web page is consists of the collection of elements, which are objects, and we need oops. Okay, we use IE that document that get element by tag name WL because our tag name in this function should be flexible. That's why we have a parameter that can hold any type of element. We identify the tag name to make the loop more specific. So that's the important of this IE that document that get elements by tag name. I think I have found with this. Okay, so in a normal for each loop, for example, you just need to loop with the collections of input element. You will specifically declare that here. But since again this function should be flexible to any type of object or element, that's why we use a variable instead. So the value of this will be dependent on the element that you send to this function. And then so again, if the element that was sent to this parameter is an input, what this loop will do is only loop in all input element within the web page and disregard the other element type. Then inside the loop, we need to add an if condition that will check the attribute of or the attribute that was sent to this function. So if LA that get attribute, So some are using if id, if name. Since we want to make this function flexible, I will be using get attribute instead, and then whatever is the value that was sent to the what at parameter. So this is also a flexible one. Any attribute sent to the WATT or what W at parameter is valid, then this if condition will also check the value of the selected attribute. If it's equal to the value sent to the WVal parameter. If the result is yes, it means that the element is existing within the page. So once the result is true, or this condition became true, we can now set the isFound variable to true. And of course, we need to add an exit for command. So this for each loop will no longer proceed on checking the remaining elements under the same element tag name. Okay, so let me just check. I think this is all what we need for this function. And of course, before I forget, whatever the result of this do until and for each loop, we can see that in the value of is found. So to return a value from this function, we need to declare again the name of this function should be equal to whatever the value of is found variable. So I think now that we can test it. So again, we in here in our main module, we already have a code that will navigate to the facebook.com. But again, the target is to ensure that this element exists before we input a value to it. So we need to call our check if the email address text box exists. And to do that, we need to call our function, which is wait element. So it is asking for the 4 parameters, but I want to make it a straight condition, so I can make the code more simpler. So if wait element, okay, these are the 4 parameters. So since this is the element we are targeting, when you inspect element dot, so here in the elements tab of the developers part of this page, you can see that this is an input element. So what we need to send is the input, and then what is the attribute that we want to use. We can actually use everything as attribute of this element, but we need to choose a very unique one. So for this, I think what we can use is the ID, and ID is always unique and should always be unique, and email. And again, this is the attribute, the ID, and then what's the value of that attribute, and that is email. And then how long we want this function to wait for that element to exist. So let's say just a 30 seconds is enough. Then let's validate. If the value is true, then let's have a message box that the element is exists within the web page, and that should be an informative message box. Oops, it should be VB information. Else message box element does not exist, and that should be a VB critical. Okay, so let's remove this one. Okay, so now let me close this and let's try to run it again. Again, bear with my internet connection. So it's just waiting for the page to completely load. After it is completely loaded, it will go on our function, which I think is currently happening right now. And here it says that the element exists within the web page. So let's try to see if ever the element does not exist, if this function can still detect that. So let's say, for example, I'll just uh, input here a value that does not exist to an input with an ID attribute. And to make this a short interval, I'll just send a 5 seconds. So let's try this. I think it's currently waiting for the element that I declare, and their element does not exist. So again, this function is very important. We will be using this on the next sessions that we have for the web automations. And I've been using this for a while now, and this is very helpful. So I hope you can also grasp the idea for it. And if you are very serious with doing web automation using VBA, I will tell you that this is very important. This is a very important function, and these are all the parameters that you need to make this function work. Okay, so we have a lot of things that still needs to do. I think the next thing is how to input value to a text box, and then how to select a value from a drop down, how to click a button, how to select from page button, how to click a link. That will be covered on the next part of this tutorial. So again, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you learned something from this video, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.